There comes a point in a man's life when he starts to realize something. Not everybody deserves an explanation. Not everybody deserves access to your mind. Not everybody deserves the full story. And one of the greatest traps a man can fall into is believing that if he just explains himself clearly enough, people will finally understand him. But that is the weakness. Because the more you explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, the more power you give them over your identity. The hermit understands this. The hermit does not move through life begging to be interpreted correctly. No. He does not stand in front of the crowd saying, "Please see me the right way. Please see me the right way." He knows what he is doing. He knows why he is doing it. And that is enough. Because real power does not always announce itself. Sometimes real power is silence. Sometimes real power is restraint. Sometimes real power is walking away without giving people the paragraph, without giving people the speech, the defense, the performance, or the emotional reaction they were trying to pull out of you. Today we are talking about why weak men keep explaining themselves and why the man who learns to say less becomes harder to control. The more you explain yourself, the weaker you look. And believe me, I know that does sound harsh, yes, but listen closely. There is a difference between communication and over-explaining. Communication is clarity. Over-explaining is insecurity wearing a suit. Communication says, "Here's what I mean." Over-explaining says, "Please don't think badly of me." And that's where a lot of men lose their power. They're not explaining because the other person needs clarity. They're explaining because they are afraid of being misjudged. They're afraid of looking wrong. They're afraid of being the villain in someone else's story. But the truth is, some people already made you the villain before you opened your mouth. Some people don't want understanding. Some people want control. They want to control you. They ask you questions not because they want the truth, but because they want to put you on trial. And every time you keep explaining, defending, clarifying, and proving, you step into their courtroom. The hermit doesn't do that. The hermit understands that silence is not weakness. Silence is boundaries. Silence says, "I don't need to convince you of who I am." That's a powerful place to stand. Because once you stop needing people to understand you, you become very difficult to manipulate. Most men are not controlled by force. Most men are controlled by the fear of being misunderstood. That's why they talk too much. That's why they defend too much. That's why they explain decisions that were already clear inside their own spirit. But a man who knows himself does not need to keep submitting evidence. He speaks when speech is useful. He explains when explanation is earned. And when the room is committed to twisting his words, he lets silence answer, because the more you explain yourself to the wrong people, the more you shrink yourself to fit inside their own limited understanding. The hermit doesn't shrink. The hermit withdraws, observes, moves. People respect what they feel from you. That's why two men can say exactly the same sentence and get completely different reactions. One man says it, and people listen. Another man says it, and people challenge him. People interrupt him. People laugh at him. People try to make him explain himself. Why? Because people are not only hearing your words, people are reading your energy. They're reading your neediness. They're reading your fear. They're reading whether you believe yourself before you ask them to believe you. And this is where over-explaining becomes very dangerous, because the more you explain from a place of anxiety, the more people feel that you are not centered. You may think you're making your case stronger, but the thing is, spiritually, emotionally, energetically, you are showing them that you can be moved. You are showing them that your opinion has authority over your state. That weakens your position. Listen, the hermit does not need to dominate the room. Doesn't need to be loud, doesn't need to perform strength. Power comes from being rooted, from saying what you mean and watching. That's the part that most people skip. They talk, but they never observe. They never sit back and notice who's listening honestly and who is only waiting for a chance to attack. You have to watch the room, watch the faces, watch the tone, watch the little smirk, watch the interruption, Watch the person who pretends not to understand something very, very simple. Because sometimes confusion is not confusion. Sometimes confusion is a tactic. People will pretend they do not understand you just to keep you explaining. Because as long as you're explaining, they're controlling the frame. As long as you're defending, they are the judge. As long as you're trying to be understood, they have power over your peace. So the move is simple. Say less. Stand firm. Let your energy speak before your mouth tries to rescue you. Because the world does not respect the man who needs approval. The world respects the man who is already anchored before approval arrives. Silence makes people feel uncomfortable because they cannot control what they cannot read. That is why some people will poke you just to get a reaction. They'll say something slick. They'll misrepresent what you said. They'll accuse you of something you know is not true. They'll try to pull you into a debate that was never meant to create understanding. It was meant to disturb your center. And when you react, they win. Not because they proved something or anything at all, but because you moved. And they are the ones that moved you. That's the real game. A lot of people are not trying to defeat your argument. They're trying to pull you out of your own frame. They want to see if they still have access to your nervous system. They want to know if one comment, one look, one insult, one accusation can make you start dancing. You must understand this. Silence is one of your strongest weapons. Not childish silence, not passive-aggressive silence, not the silent treatment, not that kind of nonsense. I'm talking about controlled silence. The silence of a man who does not need to react to every little provocation. The silence of a man who knows that not every barking dog deserves his attention. The silence of a man who understands that sometimes the best response is no response. Because when you stay silent, people reveal themselves. They expose their impatience. They expose their insecurity. They expose how badly they wanted a reaction from you. And that's information. See, that's why the hermit watches before he speaks. Most people speak because they're uncomfortable with silence. The hermit uses silence to see what is really in the room. Because silence is a mirror. It shows you who is calm. It shows you who is unstable. It shows you who respects boundaries. It shows you who was only pretending to have a conversation when really they were trying to provoke a performance. So the next time somebody tries to pull you out of yourself, pause. Don't rush to explain. Don't rush to defend. Don't rush to prove. Let the silence do what your mouth cannot. Let it expose the energy in the room. Your ego wants to be understood. Your higher self wants to be free. That's the conflict. The ego says, they have to know I am right. The ego says, they have to know I meant well. The ego says, they cannot walk away thinking that about me. So the ego starts explaining. The ego starts defending, starts performing. And it starts begging for fair interpretation from people who are never fair with you to begin with. That's the trap. You see, the ego wants the crowd to correct the record, but the deeper self does not need the crowd to certify its truth. The deeper self knows, and that knowing is quiet. This is one of the hardest lessons for a man to learn. You may be right, still misunderstood. You may be honest and still accused. You may be clear and still twisted. You may be calm and still called arrogant. You may withdraw and still be called weak. But none of that changes what is real. The question is, can you remain yourself without needing the world to agree with your version of yourself? That is where freedom begins. Because if people can control your behavior by controlling how they describe you, they own you. All they have to do is call you selfish and you start overgiving. All they have to do is call you mean and you start over-explaining. All they have to do is call you arrogant and you start shrinking. All they have to do is call you insecure and you start performing confidence. That is not power. That is slavery to perception. The hermit breaks that chain. He lets people think what they're going to think. He lets people talk. He lets people misunderstand because he knows the truth does not become false just because a fool describes it incorrectly. The ego wants applause, it wants defense, it wants validation, but the soul wants peace. And peace often begins with the sentence, I do not need to explain this anymore. The hermit move is very, very simple. Say less, watch more, leave faster. That one principle will save a man years of wasted energy. I say less because not every person deserves your inner world. I say watch more because people reveal themselves when you stop feeding them explanations. I say leave faster because some rooms are not confused, they are contaminated. And you cannot explain your way into respect from people who benefit from disrespecting you. That is a lesson many men learn way too late. They stay too long, they talk too much, they try too hard to fix the image somebody else created of them. But the hermit knows when the energy has changed. He knows when a conversation is no longer a conversation. He knows when a relationship has become a courtroom. He knows when people are not listening to understand. They're listening to collect weapons. And once he sees that, he doesn't argue with the evidence. He just exits. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Because a weak man stays where he is being drained and calls it loyalty. A weak man keeps explaining to people who keep pretending not to understand. A weak man confuses access with love. A weak man thinks walking away means losing, but the hermit knows sometimes walking away is the win. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Sometimes the strongest move is not to prove your point, it's to remove your presence. Because your presence has value. Your energy has value. Your words have value. Your attention has value. And when you give those things to people who only use them against you, you betray yourself. So remember the move. Say less, watch more, leave faster. That is how you stop leaking power. That is how you stop performing for people who cannot see you. That is how you become a man who no longer needs the room to understand him before he trusts himself. That's the Hermit Code. So, the next time you feel that urge to explain yourself, pause. Pause. Ask yourself, am I communicating? Or am I begging to be understood? Because those are not the same thing. One comes from clarity, the other comes from fear. And a man cannot build real power while he's still afraid of being misunderstood. Just let these people think. Let these people talk. Let these people misread what they were never deep enough to understand. Your job is not to be accepted in every room. Your job is not to be accepted by every room. Your job is to know when a room no longer deserves access to you. That is the path of the hermit. It's not isolation. It's not bitterness. It's not emotional shutdown. It's mastery. It's the ability to hold your center when the world tries to pull you into performance. Say less, watch more, leave faster, and protect the power that comes from no longer needing to be explained.